Nobody remembered when it started. The jokes, the whispers, the way people looked through her as though she wasn't there. By the spring of 1887, it had simply become normal. In the small frontier town of Dry Creek, people knew exactly who Amara was. And somehow, almost nobody truly saw her. The town sat along a dusty stagecoach route in western Texas. Travelers arrived every day. Cowboys, merchants, hunters, drifters, men chasing fortune, men running from trouble. The town welcomed all of them, at least most of them. Amara stood behind the counter of the Silver Lantern Inn, wiping tables before sunrise. The dining room was still empty. The lamps still burned low. Outside, the streets remained quiet. For a few precious minutes each morning, the world belonged only to her. Those moments never lasted long. The front door opened. A pair of cattle drivers entered, boots covered in dust, faces covered in exhaustion. Neither looked toward Amara. Neither offered a greeting. One simply sat down and shouted, "Coffee." Not please. Not good morning. Just coffee. Amara nodded. Right away. The men continued talking among themselves, as though she had already disappeared, as though she were part of the furniture. The same thing happened every day, and every day, she pretended not to notice. The truth was simple. Amara wasn't the kind of woman frontier towns celebrated. She wasn't young. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't the daughter of a ranch owner. She wasn't someone important. She was a black woman with a curvy figure, kind eyes, and rough hands earned from years of hard work. In the eyes of many people, that made her easy to overlook. The morning crowd arrived shortly afterward. The Silver Lantern quickly filled with voices. Coffee cups, laughter, arguments. The usual rhythm of frontier life. Amara moved between tables carrying food and drinks, working faster than anyone realized, helping everyone, not because people appreciated it, because it needed doing. Near one corner table sat old Mr. Harper, a widower who visited every morning. His hands shook badly these days. Some mornings he struggled to lift a coffee cup. Amara always noticed. Always. Without drawing attention to it. Without embarrassing him. She quietly adjusted his plate, moved his cup closer, made things easier. The old man never forgot. Across the room, a young mother entered carrying a sleepy child. She looked exhausted. Amara immediately brought extra bread. No charge. The mother smiled gratefully. Amara smiled back. Simple things. Small things. Nobody noticed. Except the people who needed them most. By midday, the stagecoach arrived. Passengers poured into town. Dusty. Hungry. Impatient. The Silver Lantern became chaos. Orders flew across the room. Chairs scraped against wooden floors. Voices overlapped. And somewhere within the noise, a loud laugh suddenly cut through everything. A ranch hand near the back table pointed toward Amara. The others laughed. One made a joke. Another added something worse. Several men chuckled. The kind of laughter that wasn't meant to be cruel, yet somehow always was. Amara heard every word. She kept working. The tray in her hands never shook. The smile on her face never disappeared. Years of practice had taught her how to survive such moments. You learn to keep moving. Keep working. Keep breathing. Later that afternoon, the inn owner found her cleaning the kitchen. Mrs. Calloway was a practical woman. Not unkind. Not especially warm either. Another busy day. Amara nodded. Looks that way. The older woman watched her for a moment, then sighed. You work too hard. Amara laughed softly. Someone has to. Mrs. Calloway smiled. A rare smile. Because she knew something most people didn't. The Silver Lantern would fall apart without Amara. Everyone depended on her. Few appreciated her. There was a difference. As evening approached, the town settled beneath a sky filled with dark clouds. Thunder rolled far beyond the horizon. A storm was coming. The first major storm of the season. Travelers hurried indoors. Shopkeepers closed windows. The wind picked up. Dust swirled through the streets. Amara stood near the front porch watching the distant lightning. She loved storms. Not because they were safe. Because they reminded her that powerful things didn't ask permission before arriving. The first rain began just after sunset. Heavy, cold, relentless. The Silver Lantern filled with stranded travelers seeking shelter. Every table became occupied. Every room became rented. The inn buzzed with activity. Then the front door opened again. A gust of wind swept rain across the floor. Conversation immediately slowed. Several people looked up, then grew quiet. A man stood in the doorway. A giant. At least that was everyone's first thought. He seemed almost too large for the entrance. Broad shoulders, dark rain-soaked coat, weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. Water dripped from the brim. The stranger carried no weapon in his hands. Yet somehow he commanded the room anyway. Silence spread. The kind of silence that appears when people encounter something unexpected. Several men exchanged nervous glances. A few instinctively moved aside. The giant cowboy slowly removed his hat. Rainwater fell to the floorboards. His face remained calm, expressionless, tired, as though he had traveled a very long distance. Nobody spoke. Nobody welcomed him. Nobody moved. Until Amara stepped forward, just as she always did. Evening. The giant looked at her. For the first time since entering the inn. His eyes softened slightly. Evening. Amara smiled. Need a room? The stranger glanced around. Then back at her. If you have one. Something about his voice surprised her. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't rough. It was gentle. Unexpectedly gentle. Outside, thunder shook the night. Inside, neither realized it yet. But this meeting would change both of their lives forever. The storm continued through the night. Rain hammered against the windows of the Silver Lantern Inn. Wind rattled the shutters. Thunder rolled across the Texas plains. Inside, travelers crowded around the fireplace. Most were too busy watching the giant cowboy to enjoy their meals. The stranger sat alone near the far wall. A single lantern illuminated part of his face. His hat rested beside him. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched on the table. Nobody joined him. Nobody seemed eager to. Every few minutes someone glanced his direction, then quickly looked away. The giant noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him always noticed. When you were that large, people rarely allowed you to be invisible. Amara carried a tray between tables. Each time she passed him, she noticed the same thing. He wasn't staring at anyone, wasn't listening to conversations, wasn't trying to intimidate people. He simply looked tired, very tired, as though the road had taken something from him. Near the fireplace, several ranch hands began whispering, not quietly enough. Look at him, hard to miss. A few chuckled. Another leaned closer. I heard about men like that. What men? Outlaws. The group nodded knowingly, as if they had already solved the mystery. One man pointed toward the stranger. No honest cowboy gets that big. More laughter followed. The giant never reacted, never looked up, never acknowledged them. That seemed to disappoint the men more than anything. People often enjoy provoking reactions, especially from strangers, especially from people who appear dangerous. When no reaction came, the conversation eventually faded. Amara brought fresh coffee to several tables, then stopped beside the giant's table. Your coffee is getting cold. The stranger looked up. His eyes were lighter than she expected. Gray, almost silver in the lantern light. I forgot. Amara smiled. Most people don't forget coffee. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Almost a smile. Almost. Long day. His voice remained surprisingly gentle. Amara nodded. I can see that. The giant finally picked up the cup. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Amara asked, You been traveling long? A while. Where from? The stranger considered the question, then shrugged. Depends how far back you want to count. That answer made her laugh. A real laugh. Not the polite kind she used for customers. The giant seemed surprised by the sound, as though he hadn't expected it. Neither had she. For a moment, the storm outside felt very far away. Then someone called her name. Work returned. The moment ended. Amara continued moving through the crowded inn. Yet several people had noticed the conversation, including the ranch hands near the fireplace. One of them frowned. Another shook his head. Apparently, they disliked seeing the stranger treated kindly. By midnight, most travelers had gone upstairs. The common room grew quieter. Only a handful of customers remained. Amara began cleaning tables. The giant still sat alone, reading something. A folded piece of paper. A letter. His expression changed as he looked at it. Not much. Just enough. Sadness. Brief. Carefully hidden. Yet Amara saw it. Because she spent her life noticing things other people missed. The giant folded the letter again, placed it inside his coat, then stared into the fire. For a very long time. Outside, the storm slowly weakened. Inside, silence settled across the room. Finally, Amara approached again. You should get some sleep. The giant looked toward the staircase. Then back at her. Probably. Yet he made no effort to move. Amara tilted her head. Something wrong. The question surprised him. She could tell. Most people asked what he was. Very few asked how he was. For several moments he said nothing, then answered honestly. Just thinking. Amara nodded. Thinking could be dangerous at night, especially when old memories joined the conversation. The giant eventually stood. The movement alone seemed capable of blocking half the room. Several remaining customers immediately watched him. Still suspicious. Still uncertain. The stranger ignored them completely. Before heading upstairs, he paused, then looked at Amara. Thank you. She blinked. For what? The answer came immediately. For treating me like a person. Silence followed. The words hit harder than she expected, because she understood them, perhaps better than anyone else in the room. For a moment neither spoke. Then the giant climbed the stairs and disappeared, leaving Amara standing beside the empty tables, thinking about something she couldn't quite explain. The next morning arrived bright and clear. The storm had passed. The town smelled of wet earth and fresh rain. Travelers prepared to leave. Wagons rolled through muddy streets. Life returned to normal, or at least it tried to. The giant cowboy appeared shortly after sunrise. Freshly shaved, clean clothes, still enormous, still impossible to ignore. Several customers watched him carefully. The same ranch hands from the previous evening remained nearby. One finally stood. Apparently courage arrived easier in daylight. The ranch hand stepped into the giant's path. You headed somewhere? The stranger nodded. West. Got a name? A long pause followed. The giant seemed to consider whether the answer mattered, then finally replied. Boone Walker. The name meant nothing to anyone. Yet somehow the ranch hands still seemed disappointed, as if they had hoped for something darker, something dangerous. One of them smirked. Don't say much, do you? Boone glanced toward him. No. The answer ended the conversation immediately. Several people laughed. Even Amara smiled, because somehow that single word felt funnier than a long speech. Later that afternoon, the town settled into another ordinary day. At least it seemed ordinary, until Amara carried a basket of supplies behind the inn. The alley was quiet, empty, or so she thought. Then she heard voices. Male voices. Low, angry. She froze. 3 drunken men stood near the back fence. And when she heard her own name, her stomach tightened. The men were talking about her, laughing, planning something, something that instantly made her want to leave. Fast, very fast. Amara slowly stepped backward, careful not to make noise, careful not to be seen. Then another shadow moved at the far end of the alley. A very large shadow. Boone Walker. The giant cowboy had heard them too, and for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek. His expression wasn't calm anymore. Boone Walker stopped walking. The alley fell silent. Not completely. The 3 drunken men were still talking, still laughing, still making plans they would never dare speak in daylight. But something had changed. The moment Boone stepped into view, the mood shifted. The giant cowboy stood at the far end of the alley, one hand resting casually beside his coat, the other hanging loosely at his side. He said nothing, didn't threaten anyone, didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood there, and somehow that was enough. The first man noticed him. His smile disappeared immediately. The second turned, then the third. For several seconds nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than an argument. The tallest drunk finally forced a laugh, trying to recover, trying to impress his friends. You got a problem? Boone looked at him, calmly, the same way a man might look at distant weather. No. The answer confused him. The drunk frowned. No. Boone nodded. No. Another long silence followed. The 3 men exchanged glances. None seemed certain what to do next, because the giant wasn't acting frightened, wasn't acting angry, and somehow that felt worse. Amara remained hidden behind several stacked supply crates, heart pounding, watching, waiting. The tallest drunk eventually stepped forward. Not much, just enough. Trying to reclaim control, trying to prove something. What are you looking at? Boone considered the question, then answered honestly. You. The response wasn't insulting, wasn't threatening. Yet the man's confidence seemed to shrink immediately, because Boone wasn't bluffing, wasn't posturing. He simply wasn't impressed. The alley grew quiet again. Finally, one of the other men tugged on his friend's sleeve. We should go. The tall man hesitated. His pride wanted one thing. His instincts wanted another. Instincts won. A moment later the 3 men left, still muttering, still pretending they weren't retreating, but retreating all the same. Boone watched them disappear around the corner. Only then did he turn toward the crates. You can come out. Amara slowly emerged. her hands still gripping the basket. For a moment neither spoke. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked earth through the alley. The town beyond remained busy, unaware of what had almost happened. Amara finally exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you." Boone shrugged. They were idiots. The answer made her laugh. Unexpectedly, Boone seemed relieved by that, as though laughter was preferable to fear. For several moments they stood together beneath the fading evening sky. Then Amara looked toward the street where the men had disappeared. "You didn't have to do that." Boone glanced in the same direction. "Yes." His answer came immediately. "I did." Something about the certainty in his voice caught her attention. No hesitation. No doubt. No need for praise. The giant picked up a fallen piece of wood and moved it aside. A simple task. Yet even that looked effortless. Amara studied him carefully. "You don't even know me." Boone smiled faintly. "Sure I do." She blinked. "No, you don't." The giant looked directly at her, then surprised her again. "I know you help Mr. Harper every morning." Amara froze. Boone continued. "I know you give bread to the young mother with the little boy." Silence. "I know you work longer than everyone else." His voice remained calm. Matter of fact. "I know you're usually the last person asleep in the inn." Amara stared at him, completely caught off guard. Nobody noticed those things. Nobody. That was the entire point. People noticed mistakes. People noticed appearances. People noticed gossip. Nobody noticed kindness. Yet somehow, he had. The realization left her speechless. Boone adjusted his hat, apparently unaware of how deeply his words had landed. Or perhaps aware and simply unwilling to mention it. The evening grew darker. Lanterns began appearing along the street. The town slowly prepared for night. Amara looked down at the basket in her hands, then back at Boone. "How long have you been watching?" The giant thought for a moment. "A couple days." That answer somehow made it worse. "Only 2 days." 2 days. And he had already seen more of her than most townspeople had in years. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, Boone glanced toward the inn. "You should head inside." Amara nodded. "Probably." Yet neither moved. Then Boone said something strange. Something she wouldn't fully understand until much later. "People get used to looking where everyone else looks." Amara frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" The giant looked toward the town, toward the crowded street, toward the people passing by, then back at her. "It means most people miss important things." The answer lingered between them. Simple, yet strangely powerful. The lamps outside the inn flickered in the growing darkness. The moment felt fragile, like something that might disappear if either of them spoke too loudly. Then voices echoed from inside the silver lantern. Someone calling for Amara. "Work again. Always work." She turned toward the back entrance, then paused, looking over her shoulder. Boone remained where he was, watching the evening settle over Dry Creek. A giant man standing quietly beneath the Texas sky. For the first time in years, Amara felt seen. Not admired. Not pitied. Seen. The realization frightened her more than she expected. Because once someone truly saw you, it became impossible to pretend you were invisible. As she reached the doorway, Boone finally spoke again. His voice barely louder than the evening wind. A whisper. Soft. Gentle. Yet somehow stronger than any shout. "You don't belong in their shadows, Amara." She stopped. The world seemed to stop with her. The laughter from inside the inn faded. The sounds of the town faded. Even the wind seemed distant. Only those words remained. "You don't belong in their shadows." Amara slowly turned around. But Boone was already walking away, heading toward the stable, toward the darkness, toward whatever road waited for him next. And for the first time in many years, a single sentence had made her question everything she believed about herself. The words followed her everywhere. "You don't belong in their shadows." The next morning, Amara heard them while sweeping the front porch. The morning after that, she heard them again while serving coffee, and again while washing dishes, and again while carrying water. The sentence refused to leave. It lingered inside her thoughts like an unanswered question. For years, Amara had accepted her place in Dry Creek, not because she loved it, because she believed it was all life intended to offer her. People overlooked her, so she learned to overlook herself. People expected little, so she learned not to expect much either. It was easier that way. Safer. Then Boone Walker arrived. Stayed 3 days. Spoke very little. And somehow managed to disturb beliefs she had carried for years. That irritated her. more than she wanted to admit. 3 days after the incident behind the inn, the giant cowboy prepared to leave. The morning sun had barely risen. Most of Dry Creek still slept. Only ranchers and hardworking people were awake at that hour. Amara stood behind the counter arranging breakfast plates when she heard hoofbeats outside. Something inside her immediately knew. She moved toward the window, and there he was. Boone stood beside his horse, checking saddlebags, preparing for the road. The sight created an unexpected feeling in her chest. Disappointment. The realization surprised her. They barely knew each other. He was simply another traveler, another stranger passing through. The frontier was full of such people, yet somehow this felt different. Before she could stop herself, she stepped outside. The cool morning air greeted her immediately. Boone looked up. A faint smile appeared. Morning. Morning. For several seconds neither spoke. The town remained quiet around them. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A wagon wheel creaked. The ordinary sounds of another frontier morning. Then Amara finally asked the obvious question. Leaving? Boone nodded. Need to. The answer felt exactly like him. Simple. Direct. No unnecessary explanation. Amara folded her arms. Always this talkative. The giant laughed softly. A genuine laugh. One she had never heard before. No. That made her laugh too. For a brief moment, neither seemed eager for the conversation to end. Then Boone reached into his coat. Removed something. A folded envelope. The paper looked worn. Carefully handled. He held it toward her. Amara frowned. What's that? A letter. She looked confused. For who? Boone's expression suggested the answer should be obvious. You. Amara stared at the envelope. Then at him. Then back at the envelope. Nobody had ever written her a letter. Not once. The idea felt strange. Almost impossible. Slowly she accepted it. The paper felt surprisingly heavy, as though it contained something more than words. Boone adjusted his hat, then climbed into the saddle. Just like that. As though handing someone a letter was perfectly normal. As though he hadn't just handed her something she would remember forever. You should read it later. Amara nodded. Still confused. Still curious. Boone turned his horse toward the western road. Then paused. Looking back one final time. The morning sunlight touched the edge of his hat. His expression remained calm. Yet there was something else there now. Hope. Take care of yourself, Amara. Then he rode away. No dramatic farewell. No promises. No speeches. Only hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. The road swallowed him. The frontier always did. For several moments Amara remained standing there, watching, until the giant cowboy disappeared completely. The envelope remained in her hand, unopened, waiting. The rest of the day passed slowly. Work seemed heavier. The inn felt quieter. Even the customers seemed louder somehow. Everything reminded her that Boone was gone. By evening she finally found a moment alone. The kitchen sat empty. The last dishes had been cleaned. The lamps burned low. Outside, darkness settled over Dry Creek. Amara removed the envelope from her apron pocket, carefully unfolded the letter, then began reading. The handwriting surprised her. Neat, steady, deliberate, like the man himself. The letter wasn't long, yet every sentence seemed important. Amara read slowly, taking in every word. Boone thanked her, not for food, not for lodging, for kindness. He wrote that most people remembered grand gestures, big moments, loud moments, but life was often changed by smaller things. A cup of coffee, a kind word, a person choosing compassion when nobody was watching. Then came the part that made her stop breathing. For several seconds, Boone had written, "The people in this town see what you do." She frowned immediately, because that wasn't true. Then she continued reading. "The problem is they have become used to it." Silence filled the kitchen. Amara stared at the words. Boone had somehow explained something she had never understood. People didn't ignore her kindness because it lacked value. They ignored it because it had become expected. Ordinary. Invisible. Like sunlight. People only noticed when it disappeared. Her eyes moved further down the page. And there she found something else. An address. A ranch. Western Texas. Several hundred miles away. Beneath it, Boone had written one final sentence. A sentence she would remember for the rest of her life. Never let other people decide how much you are worth. Amara lowered the letter. Emotion tightened her throat. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way. Nobody. Not because they were cruel. Because they never thought about it. Boone had. And somehow that mattered. More than she could explain. The following weeks passed. Life returned to routine, at least on the surface. Yet something inside Amara had changed. The letter remained folded inside her apron pocket. Every day, everywhere. She read it repeatedly, until she nearly memorized every word. Then one afternoon, disaster arrived. Without warning, without mercy, Mrs. Calloway gathered the staff inside the dining room. Her expression looked troubled, worried, the kind of expression that usually meant bad news. Very bad news. Amara felt her stomach tighten. The older woman took a deep breath, then spoke. "The silver lantern has been sold." Silence. The words landed like a hammer. No one moved. No one spoke. Amara felt the world shift beneath her feet. Because suddenly, the only home she had ever known was disappearing. And for the first time in her life, she had nowhere to go. The silver lantern closed 30 days later. 30 days. That was all. 30 days to say goodbye to a life she had spent nearly 10 years building. 30 days to watch familiar routines disappear. 30 days to pretend she wasn't afraid. The new owner arrived during the final week. A businessman from Dallas. Polished boots. Expensive coat. Cold eyes. He walked through the inn studying everything. The furniture. The kitchen. The guest rooms. The staff. Especially the staff. Amara knew the answer before he spoke. Some people carried decisions in their eyes. This man certainly did. 3 days later he confirmed it. Several workers would remain. Others would leave. Amara was among those leaving. The conversation lasted less than a minute. No argument. No discussion. No apology. Just a decision. Final. Permanent. When it ended, Amara simply nodded. Then returned to work. The same way she always had. Quietly. Dignified. Without complaint. But that night she sat alone in her small room above the inn and stared at Boone's letter. For a very long time. The paper had become worn. From use. The edges softened. The folds nearly permanent. Her eyes found the address again. The ranch. Western Texas. Several hundred miles away. She had read those words countless times, never imagining they might matter. Now they did. Outside her window, Dry Creek slept peacefully. Inside, uncertainty sat beside her. What happened next? Where would she go? What would she become? For years those questions never mattered. The silver lantern had always been there. Tomorrow looked exactly like yesterday. Not anymore. The world had suddenly become larger. And far more frightening. Amara unfolded the letter one more time, reading the final sentence. Again, never let other people decide how much you are worth. The words felt different now. More urgent. More personal. As though Boone somehow knew this day would come. A faint laugh escaped her. The idea was ridiculous, yet comforting. Several days later the silver lantern closed its doors. For the final time. The last customer left shortly before sunset. The lamps were extinguished. The dining room emptied. Silence filled the building. A strange silence. The kind that appears after something ends. Mrs. Calloway hugged her before leaving. A rare gesture. The older woman wiped away tears. You deserved better. Amara smiled softly. So did you. The two women stood together for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Eventually they had no choice. The frontier rarely allowed people to keep things forever. Mrs. Calloway climbed into a wagon and disappeared down the road, leaving Amara alone. Truly alone. For the first time in many years. The sun slipped below the horizon. Darkness settled across Dry Creek. Amara stood in front of the empty inn. One small suitcase at her feet. Everything she owned. Everything. 10 years reduced to a single suitcase. The realization should have broken her. Instead it created something unexpected. Freedom. Terrifying freedom. The kind that appears when nothing remains to lose. Her eyes drifted toward the western horizon. Toward the direction written on Boone's letter. Toward the ranch. Toward possibility. The decision arrived quietly. Without drama. Without fanfare. The same way important decisions often do. The next morning, Amara purchased a seat on a supply wagon heading west. The driver looked surprised. Traveling alone? Amara nodded. The man scratched his beard. Long road. I know. Dangerous too. I know that too. The driver studied her for a moment, then smiled, apparently satisfied. By sunrise the wagon departed. Dry Creek slowly disappeared behind them. The town grew smaller, then smaller still, until it vanished completely. Amara never looked back. The journey west proved harder than she expected. The Texas frontier stretched endlessly. Days became weeks. Dust covered everything. The heat felt relentless. Some nights were freezing. others unbearably hot. The wagon traveled through lonely settlements, across rivers, through open prairie, past ranches and abandoned homesteads. The world seemed larger than she had ever imagined, and far more beautiful. For the first time in years, nobody knew who she was. Nobody expected anything. Nobody had already decided her place. The feeling was strange, yet strangely exciting. Several travelers joined the wagon along the way. A widower heading toward New Mexico, a young couple searching for land, a former schoolteacher hoping for a fresh start. Each carried a story. Each carried loss. Each carried hope. The frontier seemed full of such people. People rebuilding themselves, 1 mile at a time. One evening, while camped beside a shallow creek, an elderly woman sat beside Amara. The stars shone brightly overhead. The fire crackled softly. The older woman smiled. "What are you running from?" Amara laughed. "I don't think I'm running." The woman nodded. "Then what are you chasing?" The question lingered, long after the conversation ended. What was she chasing? A job? A future? Boone? No, not Boone. Not exactly. The answer arrived later that night. As she stared into the fire, she was chasing the version of herself Boone had somehow seen before she did. The woman who didn't belong in shadows. The woman worth more than other people's opinions. The woman she had never allowed herself to become. For the first time, that future felt possible. The journey continued. Another week passed. Then, another. The ranch grew closer. According to the wagon driver, only a few days remained. Only a few days. The thought both comforted and frightened her. What if Boone wasn't there? What if he didn't remember her? What if she had misunderstood everything? Doubt arrived easily. Hope always seemed harder. Late one afternoon, the wagon entered a narrow stretch of open prairie bordered by rocky hills. The driver suddenly became quiet. Very quiet. Several experienced travelers noticed immediately. One glanced toward the ridgeline. Another checked his rifle. Amara felt the mood change. The air itself seemed different. Tense. Uneasy. Then the driver muttered 2 words that made everyone's stomach tighten. "Horse thieves." Silence followed. The wagon slowed. Several riders appeared along the ridge. Watching. Waiting. Counting. The sun hung low behind them, turning them into dark silhouettes. 1. Then 3. Then 5. More appeared. Too many. Far too many. The wagon driver cursed under his breath. Because everyone understood the truth. They weren't being watched anymore. They were being hunted. The riders began moving. Slowly. Deliberately. Like wolves circling wounded prey. The supply wagon rolled forward another few yards before stopping completely. Nobody needed instructions. Everyone understood. Running was impossible. The thieves had already chosen the ground. High ridges. Good visibility. No easy escape. The wagon driver spat into the dust, then checked his rifle. The old widower reached for his revolver. The young husband beside him did the same. Even the former schoolteacher looked ready to fight. Fear was visible everywhere. Yet nobody surrendered. The frontier rarely rewarded surrender. Amara sat quietly among them, heart pounding, hands trembling. The wind carried dust across the prairie. Above them, the riders continued watching, counting, measuring, waiting. Then one of them finally descended from the ridge. A large man with a scar running across one side of his face. He rode confidently, the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Several others followed behind him. The leader stopped 20 yards from the wagon, close enough to speak, far enough to remain safe. His eyes swept across the travelers, the supplies, the horses, everything. Then he smiled, a smile that carried no kindness, no need for trouble. Nobody answered. The scarred man seemed amused. "We'll take the horses." Silence. The wagon. Still silence. The supplies. The smile widened. "And then we'll leave." The wagon driver laughed bitterly. "Generous of you." Several thieves chuckled. The scarred man ignored the remark. His gaze moved slowly across the travelers, then stopped. On Amara. Something inside her immediately tightened. The man continued staring. Longer than necessary. Longer than comfortable. The smile vanished, replaced by calculation. The kind men used when evaluating property. Not people. Property. Amara had seen that look before. Too many times. The scarred man finally spoke again. "This one's coming too." The prairie went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. The wagon driver straightened immediately. "No." The answer came before he could stop himself. The thief's eyes narrowed. "What?" The driver swallowed, yet repeated himself. "No." The scarred man laughed. The other thieves laughed with him. The sound felt ugly. Wrong. Several riders casually rested hands near their weapons. The message was obvious. This discussion had limits. The leader looked toward Amara again, then back at the driver. That's unfortunate. The wagon driver tightened his grip on the rifle. Everyone knew what happened next. Everyone. The young husband beside Amara whispered something to his wife. The old widower quietly checked his revolver. The schoolteacher closed his eyes briefly, preparing himself. The thieves began spreading out, positioning, surrounding. The moment before violence always felt strangely quiet, as though the world held its breath. Then a distant sound interrupted everything. Hoofbeats. Faint. Far away. Every head turned. The thieves looked toward the western horizon. So did the travelers. Dust. A single dust cloud. Moving fast. Very fast. The scarred man frowned. One rider? That made no sense. Nobody attacked a gang alone. The dust cloud grew larger. Closer. Closer still. Then another appeared. And another. And another. The thieves exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's confidence began slipping. Not much. Just enough. The first rider emerged from the dust. A giant. Broad shoulders. Brown hat. Powerful horse. The sunlight behind him turned his silhouette into something almost unreal. For one impossible second, Amara couldn't breathe. Boone. The giant cowboy rode at the front of nearly a dozen ranch hands. The distance vanished quickly. The thieves understood the problem immediately. The numbers had changed. The balance had changed. Everything had changed. The scarred man cursed. Several riders began backing away. Others reached for weapons. Too late. Boone and his men swept across the prairie like a storm front. Fast. Organized. Decisive. The confrontation ended almost before it began. Several thieves fled. Others surrendered. A few attempted resistance. None succeeded. Within minutes the gang had broken apart completely. The scarred leader disappeared into the hills with what remained of his pride. The danger passed. The silence afterward felt almost unbelievable. Travelers slowly emerged from shock. The wagon driver lowered his rifle. The old widower sat down heavily. The young wife began crying from relief. And Amara simply stared. Boone guided his horse toward the wagon, then stopped. For several seconds neither spoke. The giant looked exactly as she remembered. The same calm eyes. The same weathered face. The same quiet presence. Then Boone glanced at the suitcase beside her. A small smile appeared. Looks like you decided to travel. Amara laughed. A shaky laugh. Half relief. Half disbelief. You knew? Boone shrugged. Not exactly. The answer sounded familiar. Very familiar. Amara climbed down from the wagon. For a moment neither moved. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden beneath the late afternoon sun. Finally she asked the question that mattered. What are you doing here? Boone looked toward the captured thieves, then toward the wagon, then back at her. We heard about the gang. A simple answer. Yet she knew there was more. Much more. The giant cowboy seemed to recognize it. His eyes drifted briefly toward her suitcase. Then he smiled again, a little wider this time. The truth. Amara nodded. Boone adjusted his hat. I figured there was a chance you might actually show up. For a moment she couldn't speak, because suddenly she understood. The rescue wasn't an accident. The timing wasn't luck. Boone had been watching the roads, waiting, just in case. Not because he expected anything, because he kept his promises. The realization struck deeper than she expected. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the prairie, Boone guided the wagon toward a distant valley, toward home, toward his ranch, toward the next chapter of her life. Hours later they crested a hill, and for the first time, Amara saw it. The ranch. Wide fields, windmills, horse corrals, dozens of grazing cattle, lantern lights glowing warmly in the distance. Beautiful, peaceful, alive. Amara stared in silence, because she had never seen anything like it, never imagined anything like it. Beside her, Boone noticed. Not bad. The understatement made her laugh. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt possible. But neither of them knew that trouble was already waiting inside that valley. And before long, Amara would be forced to discover just how much she had truly changed. Trouble arrived 2 weeks later. Not with gunfire. Not with threats. Not at first. It arrived wearing a fine suit, a polished watch, and a smile that never reached the eyes. His name was Walter Briggs. one of the wealthiest landowners in western Texas. The kind of man who believed money solved every problem. And when money failed, other methods usually followed. Amara first saw him riding through the ranch gates on a black horse. 3 hired men followed behind him. The workers noticed immediately. The atmosphere changed. Conversations stopped. Several ranch hands exchanged uneasy looks. Boone noticed too. His expression hardened slightly. A reaction Amara had never seen before. That alone told her everything she needed to know. Briggs dismounted, brushed dust from his expensive coat, then smiled. The same smile. Polite. Cold. Dangerous. Boone. Boone nodded once. Walter. No handshake. No warmth. Nothing. The silence between them felt older than the ranch itself. Briggs glanced around the property. The horses. The fields. The windmills. Calculating. Evaluating. Like a man studying something he already believed belonged to him. Eventually, he looked back toward Boone. You've had time to think. Boone folded his arms. No. The answer came immediately. The smile faded slightly. Briggs sighed. As stubborn as ever. Neither man appeared surprised. Which meant this conversation had happened before. Many times. Amara watched from the porch. Listening. Learning. Briggs removed a folded document from his coat. Held it out. You should reconsider. Boone never touched it. Never looked at it. No. The answer remained unchanged. Simple. Final. Briggs laughed softly. The sound carried no humor. You own the last piece. Silence. You know that. The workers nearby remained motionless. No one interrupted. No one spoke. Because everyone understood. This wasn't about land. Not really. It was about control. The ranch sat between several properties Briggs already owned. Without Boone's land, his plans remained incomplete. With it, he would control the entire valley. Briggs looked around again, then smiled. You can't stop progress forever. Boone shrugged. Watch me. Several ranch hands tried not to laugh. One failed. Briggs heard it. His eyes narrowed briefly. Then he climbed back onto his horse. The smile returned. Only colder now. Think carefully. The wealthy rancher turned toward the gate, then paused, looking back one final time. Because eventually everyone has a price. His gaze drifted toward the workers, toward the ranch, toward Amara, then back to Boone. The meaning was clear. The threat remained unspoken, but present. A moment later he rode away. His men followed. The dust settled slowly behind them. Silence lingered. Then work resumed, as though nothing had happened. Yet something had. That evening, Amara found Boone repairing a fence line near sunset. The giant cowboy worked quietly, hammering nails, replacing boards, exactly the way he always did after difficult conversations. Work first, talk later. Maybe. Amara approached. You've known him a long time. Boone nodded. Too long. She waited. Eventually he continued. He's been trying to buy this ranch for years. Why? Boone looked toward the valley. The answer seemed obvious to him. Because he doesn't care about the ranch. His eyes moved toward the workers' homes, the barns, the grazing fields. He cares about owning everything around it. Amara understood immediately. Some people collected land the same way others collected trophies. The next several days became uncomfortable. Strange things started happening. A supply delivery never arrived. A cattle buyer suddenly canceled a contract. Fence posts disappeared. Water rights were questioned. Small problems. One after another. Nothing serious enough to prove, yet impossible to ignore. Pressure. Constant pressure. The workers noticed. Everyone did. Then came the accident. 3 weeks after Briggs' visit. A frightened horse broke loose during a storm. One ranch hand was nearly crushed. Boone reacted instantly, pulling the man clear, saving his life. But not before taking the full impact himself. The giant cowboy was thrown hard against a corral gate. The crack echoed across the yard. Several workers shouted. Amara ran. Boone tried standing. Failed. Then collapsed. The ranch doctor arrived before sunset. The verdict wasn't good. Broken ribs. Shoulder injury. Several weeks of recovery. Minimum. The news spread quickly. By morning, rumors spread even faster. Briggs heard and immediately acted. 2 days later he returned. This time with lawyers, documents, and confidence. A gathering was called near the main barn. Workers assembled. Neighbors arrived. Everyone sensed trouble. Briggs stood before the crowd. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly prepared. He spoke about business. Efficiency. Opportunity. The future. Beautiful words. Empty words. Then he made his offer. Sell now. Before the ranch collapsed. Before debts arrived. Before things became worse. Several people looked uncertain. A few even looked frightened. Because Boone wasn't there. He remained confined inside the ranch house. Injured. Unable to lead. Unable to speak. Exactly as Briggs intended. The wealthy landowner smiled. Certain victory was finally within reach. Then something unexpected happened. A chair scraped against the wooden porch. Everyone turned. Amara stepped forward. Silence followed. The same kind of silence she had known her entire life. The silence of people expecting her to remain quiet, to stay invisible, to stand in the background. Like always, Amara felt every eye upon her. Fear arrived instantly, powerfully. The old version of herself would have stepped back, would have lowered her gaze, would have said nothing. Then she remembered a letter, a sentence, a whisper. You don't belong in their shadows. Something inside her settled, steadied. For the first time in her life, Amara stepped fully into the light and looked directly at Walter Briggs. The entire crowd watched, waiting, because nobody knew it yet. But the woman everyone once ignored was finally about to speak. The entire crowd watched, waiting. Amara could feel every pair of eyes upon her. The ranch hands, the neighbors, the lawyers, Walter Briggs, even the workers standing near the barn doors. For most of her life, moments like this had terrified her. Being noticed, being judged, being seen. The old Amara would have stepped back, apologized, disappeared. Not today. Walter Briggs smiled politely. The same cold smile. The same confident smile. The smile of a man certain he had already won. He looked Amara up and down, then chuckled softly. And who exactly are you? A few people shifted uncomfortably. The insult was obvious, deliberate. Amara heard it, and for the first time in her life, she didn't shrink from it. Instead, she smiled. A calm smile. A confident smile. The kind nobody in Dry Creek would have recognized. I'm one of the people who lives here. The answer seemed simple, yet several workers immediately straightened. Because she had said lives here. Not works here. Not stays here. Lives here. Walter tilted his head, amused. You own this ranch? No. Then this conversation doesn't concern you. The lawyer smiled. Several of Briggs' men smirked. The old Amara might have believed them. The old Amara might have stepped aside. Instead, she took another step forward. The crowd grew silent. Because something was changing, and everyone could feel it. Amara looked toward the workers gathered around the yard, then toward the homes scattered across the valley. The barns, the corrals, the windmill, the grazing fields. Finally, she looked back at Briggs. You think this place is land? The wealthy rancher frowned slightly. Amara continued. You think it's fences? Silence. You think it's cattle? More silence. You think it's numbers written on paper? Several ranch hands nodded quietly. Walter's smile began fading. Amara pointed toward the workers. The ranch is them. Toward the houses. The families. Toward the valley. The people who built this place. The crowd remained completely silent. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Because they knew she was telling the truth. Walter Briggs laughed. But now the laughter sounded forced. You expect anyone to believe that? Before Amara could answer, another voice appeared. I do. Everyone turned. An elderly ranch hand stepped forward. Then another. Then another. The movement spread through the crowd. Quietly. Naturally. Like water finding its path. The old foreman removed his hat. I've worked here 20 years. Another worker nodded. So have I. A woman carrying a child stepped beside them. My husband is buried on this land. A young ranch hand stepped forward. Boone gave me my first job. More voices followed. One after another. Not loud. Not dramatic. Honest. Real. The kind of truth money cannot buy. For the first time since arriving, Walter Briggs looked uncertain. Very uncertain. Because suddenly this wasn't a business negotiation. It was a community. And communities are harder to purchase. The wealthy rancher looked toward his lawyers. Neither appeared comfortable anymore. The crowd had chosen a side. And it wasn't his. Walter's smile vanished completely. His eyes settled on Amara. You planned this. Amara shook her head. No. And she was telling the truth. She hadn't planned anything. She had simply stopped being afraid. The difference mattered. A long silence followed. Then a familiar voice came from the porch. Deep. Calm. Steady. I think we're done here. Every head turned. Boone stood in the doorway, one arm supported by a sling, ribs still healing. face pale, yet standing. The giant cowboy slowly stepped onto the porch. The workers smiled immediately. Relief spread across the ranch. Walter Briggs stared, apparently surprised Boone had recovered enough to appear. Boone looked directly at him, the same way he always did, without fear, without anger, without needing approval. This ranch isn't for sale. Walter's jaw tightened. Boone took another step forward. And it never will be. The silence that followed felt final. The kind of silence that marks the end of a fight. Briggs looked around one last time. At the workers, the neighbors, the families, then at Amara, the woman he had dismissed minutes earlier. Finally, he climbed onto his horse. Humiliated, defeated, not by violence, not by force, but by people standing together. Moments later he rode away. The lawyers followed. Then the hired men. Soon only dust remained. The valley exhaled. Laughter slowly returned. Conversations resumed. Life moved forward. The danger was gone. That evening the ranch gathered for supper beneath strings of lantern light. Children ran between tables. Music drifted through the warm Texas air. Workers celebrated. Families laughed. The valley felt alive. Amara sat quietly near the edge of the gathering, watching, thinking. The stars appeared overhead, one by one. Eventually Boone joined her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Finally Boone glanced toward her. You surprised everybody today. Amara laughed softly. I surprised myself. Boone nodded. Those are usually the important ones. For a while they watched the lanterns sway in the evening breeze. Then Amara reached into her pocket, carefully unfolding a worn piece of paper. The letter. Boone immediately recognized it. His eyes widened slightly. You kept it. Amara smiled. I carried it every day. The giant cowboy looked genuinely speechless, which was rare, very rare. She studied the letter, the worn edges, the faded folds, the words that had traveled hundreds of miles with her. Then she looked at Boone. Do you remember what you wrote? Boone sighed. Probably something embarrassing. That made her laugh. Then she repeated the sentence that had changed everything. Never let other people decide how much you are worth. The words lingered between them. The same words that had carried her west. The same words that had helped her stand before Briggs. The same words that had rebuilt her life. Boone looked toward the valley, then toward her, and finally smiled. A real smile. Warm, proud, quiet. You figured it out. Amara shook her head. No. Boone frowned. No. She smiled. I believed it because you did first. For a moment neither spoke. Because some truths are too important to interrupt. Years later, people would still tell stories about Boone Walker. The giant cowboy. The man who never talked much. The man who always kept his word. But in that valley, another story became just as famous. The story of a woman everyone once ignored. A woman who crossed half of Texas chasing a future she couldn't yet see. A woman who finally discovered her own voice. And when people asked Amara what changed her life, she never mentioned the journey, or the ranch, or Walter Briggs. She always gave the same answer. A whisper. One simple whisper from a quiet cowboy. A whisper that reminded her she was never meant to live in anyone's shadow.